Good afternoon. Welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar at Purdue University. Today it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Hao Chen from University of California, Davis. Professor Chen is an assistant professor in the computer science department at UC Davis. He received his PhD in computer science from UC Berkeley in 2004. His research interest is in computer security with an emphasis on wireless security, web security, and software security. In 2007, Professor Chen received the NSF Korea Award to support his research in wireless security.
Thanks, Dongyan. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to my talk. So this talk describes a project that's supported by the NSF Career Award. So the goal of the project is to identify unique vulnerabilities in cellular data networks. So we have been looking at vulnerabilities on the internet for a decade, and we think that we know more or less the vulnerabilities there. But as computing moves to the cellular data networks, what new vulnerabilities are there, and how can we deal with these new vulnerabilities? This particular work focuses on the scheduling algorithm in the third generation cellular data networks. And this is a joint work with my student, Radmila Rasic, and Dennis Ma and my colleague, Xin Liu at UC Davis. The third generation cellular data networks provide a high-speed downlink data access. For example, there are two example technologies. One is called HSDPA, high-speed downlink packet access. The other one is called EVDO, evolution data optimized. HSDPA is being deployed by some U.S. major wireless cellular carriers in major cities. In the San Francisco Bay Area, HSDPA is being deployed. The reason why they can offer high-speed downlink data access is that they exploit the multi-user diversity. So multi-user diversity means that your cell phone's channel condition varies, depends on its location and the time. Okay. There might be some interference such that suddenly your channel condition gets bad. And when you move to a bad area, such as inside an elevator or a corner, your channel condition might also get bad. However, chances are that at any given time, a subset of cellular devices have relatively good channel condition. And this is the basic intuition behind multi-user diversity. You might think that multi-user diversity is a bad thing because new cell phone can get stable channel condition. But rather than fighting against it, people have tried to embrace multi-user diversity to improve the throughput of a cellular data system. And this is achieved by algorithms called opportunistic scheduling. So let me give you some brief background on multi-user diversity. So in a typical opportunistic scheduling algorithm, the base station uses time division multiple access to divide a channel into time slots, to chop the time into different slots. And each slot is about 2 milliseconds in HSDPA and 1.67 milliseconds in EVDO. This is called the transmission time interval. So the assumption behind opportunistic scheduling is that each cell phone's channel condition changes independently, okay, both in time and in location. However, at any given moment, some varying set of cell phones have relatively good channel conditions. Therefore, opportunistic scheduling tries to embrace this multi-user diversity by asking every cell phone to report its channel condition at every time slot. So once the base station receives the channel condition reports from all cell phones, the base station will pick a cell phone with a relatively good channel condition to be scheduled in the next time slot. Among all the algorithms for doing opportunistic scheduling, a very common algorithm is called the proportional fair algorithm. Once you do scheduling, you have to strike a balance between maximizing the system throughput and reducing the delay. Right? If you just want to maximize the system throughput, you always want to schedule the cell phone with the best channel quality. But if you always do that, then some cell phones with bad channel quality would starve could be forever. So you always want to strike a balance. And in particular, this proportional fair scheduler tries to strike a balance by maximizing the product of the throughput of all the users. Here is the particular scheme used by this scheduling algorithm. So the base station tries to maximize this value. The numerator of this value is the instantaneous channel quality of a particular cell phone user I. The denominator is the average throughput of the same user. As I just described, there are two values. One is the instantaneous channel quality. The other is the average throughput of the same user. And the average throughput of the user is calculated using a sliding window. Okay, this is your typical sliding window calculation. If the user I is scheduled at that time slot, then its average throughput is increased by the sliding window. If that user is not scheduled at that time slot, then its average throughput is decayed by a factor of 1 minus alpha. Okay, so much for the background on proportional fair scheduler. So what vulnerabilities did we find? Well, we found two vulnerabilities. The first is that at each time slot, every cell phone reports its channel condition to the base station. But the base station does not verify the authenticity of the channel condition report. And in fact, it's very hard for the base station to verify the channel condition because one has to measure the channel condition at the location of the cell phone. Since the base station could be far away from the cell phone, it's not feasible for the base station to verify the channel condition reported by the cell phone, because the cell phone could be hiding behind a metal shield or inside an elevator, and there's no way that the base station can know that information. Another problem with proportional fair algorithm is that even though proportional fair guarantees fairness, the fairness is only guaranteed inside a cell. Once a cell phone moves to different cells, the fairness is no longer guaranteed. And I'll show you in a moment how this can be exploited by attackers. So one fundamental reason behind these vulnerabilities is that cellular networks were designed with the assumption that all the cellular phones are trusted. So this probably is an artifact carried over from the traditional landline telephone designs. In the traditional landline telephone systems, a telephone device is issued to you by your telephone company, and there's not much that the telephone can do besides dialing numbers. So attack is not really a concern there. However, as we move to the cellular networks, and as we have more and more sophisticated cell phones, for example, iPhones, there are a lot of things you can do with your cell phone. Well, the cellular providers love this because this means that they can push a lot of functionalities into your cell phone, which means that there are, the equipment at the network, at the base stations, can be simplified. Right? This is a good news for the equipment manufacturers. But in terms of security, this is a big warning sign. Because once you cannot trust the cellular devices, you have to decide of everything that the device has told you, the network, what do you have to verify and how you can verify those information. Okay, so I have told you the vulnerabilities. Are these vulnerabilities real? In other words, can an attacker take advantage of these vulnerabilities to attack the network? I'm going to show you one particular attack. So the goal of this attack is to hoard as many time slots as possible by the malicious cell phone. So the cell phone could launch this attack for two different reasons. The first reason is being selfish. Okay? You want to get as many slots as possible. For example, if you are downloading the latest video, sorry, I mean the latest kernel of Linux, and this is the first reason. The second reason is that if you really want to disrupt a cellular network, then you want to shut off every other user from the system. Now, increasingly, cell phones are used for emergency response purposes. And there's a trend that the voice is being carried over through the data channel. If you can shut everyone off the data network, then chances are that in the future, they may not even be able to contact the emergency services like 911. So that will be a big problem. Regardless of their intentions, the attacker just wants to grab as many scheduling slots as possible. And we have devised a two-tiered attack. So the first tier is the first tier attack is called the intra-cell attack. So which means that the attacker stays in the cell. So this attack exploits the unverified channel condition report by cell phones. In order to increase the effectiveness of the attack, we designed a second tier attack, where this attack spans more than one cell. And this attack exploits the handoff procedure of cell phones. Okay, I'm going to tell you how each of the attacks work. But before I tell you attack, let me make my threat model explicit. So a threat model tells you what we consider as threats and what we do not consider as threats. So we assume that the attackers control a few cell phones, and these cell phones have been legitimately admitted into a network. For example, the attacker could have spread malware onto cell phones, so that the malware will execute according to the attacker's intention. And also, if the attackers doesn't have malware, then attackers can simply go out and buy some prepaid data cards. Okay, they are very popular. So cellular data, prepaid data cards are very popular in Asia and Europe, and I saw that they have already become available in major U.S. cities. Okay, so by this way, you can attack the network without being identified, because you pay cash for the prepaid card. And we also assume that the attackers can modify the cell phone, perhaps the software or even the firmware, to modify the way that cell phones report channel conditions and the way cell phones request the handoffs. However, we do not assume that the attackers can penetrate the cellular networks. Okay, so this attack was launched entirely from a cell phone. Okay, it does not penetrate the cellular network. So in our first attack, we assume that the attacker knows the channel condition of every other cell phone in the network. You might think that this is an unreasonable assumption. Yes, it is an unreasonable assumption. But I'm going to show you later how this assumption can be relaxed. Once the attacker knows the channel condition of all the other cell phones in the network, then his attack strategy becomes very simple. If you recall from the previous slide, the base station selects the cell. Can you see my mouse? Okay. The base station selects a cell phone to schedule, such that the scheduled cell phone has the maximum value, okay, the maximum ratio between its instantaneous rate, data rate and its average throughput. So therefore, the attacker simply calculates its instantaneous channel quality indicator such that its ratio is the maximum among all the cell phones, and then it reports that channel condition indicator to the base station, and the base station will schedule it. Very simple. And here's our simulation results. So we have a cell of 50 users, and we let between 1 to 5 of the users to be attackers. And we measured how many continuous time slots that the attackers can get using the attack strategy that I showed in the last slide. As you can see that if there's one attacker, the attacker can get 20 continuous time slots. Whereas if there are 5 attackers, then they may get about 100 time slots. But think about it. This is not really very impressive, because if you recall, a time slot in HSDPA is only 2 milliseconds. So 20 time slots is about 40 milliseconds. And even 100 time slots is about 200 milliseconds. Okay, that's less than a minute. Yes, the attackers can get this like less than a second all to itself. But this doesn't really affect other mobile devices a lot. Okay, there's a jitter, but that's it. So this attack cannot continue. So the next question is that how can we improve this attack? Is it possible to perpetuate this attack? And we discovered that yes, you can do this. And here's how you do it. Remember that proportional fair guarantees fairness only within the single cell. In other words, within a single cell, once a cell phone gets scheduled, its average throughput will increase, but its ratio will decrease. The ratio between its instantaneous data rate and its average data throughput will decrease, which means that once a cell phone gets scheduled, it will have a lower scheduling priority in the future, at future time slots. However, proportional fair does not carry over across different cells. Once a cell phone hands over to a different cell, its average throughput is forgotten. Therefore, the cell phone can start over again with a very low throughput. And based on this observation, you can design the following scheme to attack the network perpetually. Suppose the attacker can have 2 cell phones, and can place the 2 cell phones in the overlapping area of 2 neighboring cells. And suppose the 2 cell phones can communicate with each other, for example, through a local area network or Wi-Fi. At the beginning of the attack, the top cell phone is admitted to the left cell, and the bottom cell phone is admitted to the right cell. And each of the 2 cell phones launches the attack that I showed you earlier. Okay, each of the cell phones tries to get as many scheduling slots as possible. So each of them can get about 20 continuous scheduling slots. Once one of them can't get any more scheduling slots, they hand over to the other cell. So which means that so they attack, and once they can't get any more slots, each of them switches to the other cell. And then they repeat this attack once again. And then until each one of them can't get any more slots, and they stop, and they switch again. Okay, so they can continue this forever. Then we measured the effectiveness of this attack. So we ran a simulation for about 30 seconds to see of the 30 seconds, what's the percentage of scheduling slots that the two cell phones can get. Remember, there are at least one cell phone per cell. So we looked at how many total slots that the attackers can get based on the number of attackers per cell. Remember, each cell has 50 users. So we learned that if there's only one cell phone per cell, the cell phone can get about 80% of all the slots in that cell. Okay, so just one cell phone, one malicious cell phone out of 50 cell phones in a cell can get about 80% of all the scheduling slots. And if you increase the number of malicious cell phones in a cell to 5, in total they can get about 90%, more than 90% of all the scheduling slots in that cell. Remember, I mentioned earlier that we made this simplistic assumption that the attackers knew the precise channel condition indicator of all the other cell phones. But this is not realistic. Most likely, the attackers do not know the channel condition indicators of other cell phones. So in this case, how can the attackers decide what channel condition quality to report? Well, remember that the attacker only needs to calculate the maximum ratio. Okay? They don't really care about the precise the precise CQI. They only care about the maximum ratio. But the attacker does not know everyone else's ratio. Well, our solution is that we let the attackers estimate the maximum ratio of all the other cell phones. And here's how we estimate it. Suppose at a time slot, the maximum ratio among all the other cell phones is C of t. Now, from that point on, the attacker can estimate future maximum ratios based on this formula. This is very similar to the sliding window that you saw earlier. So if the attacker is scheduled, then we increase the estimated maximum by a rate of 1 over 1 minus epsilon. So this is based on the intuition that if the attacker is scheduled, then all the other cell phones are not scheduled. So which means that the throughput of all the other cell phones will decrease because they're not scheduled. So therefore, that ratio will increase by a constant factor. Okay, so that's the intuition behind this. However, if the cell phone is not scheduled, then we modify the maximum ratio by this. I won't go into detail of how we arrived at this. Then we ran the simulation again for 30 seconds to see how effective this attack remains if the attackers do not know the precise channel condition of all the other cell phones. Well, we learned that in this more realistic condition, the attack is not as effective as in the ideal condition, but it's still pretty good effective. If there's only one attacker in every cell of 50 users, then this one attacker can get about 75 of all the scheduling slots. Whereas if there are 5 attackers in a cell, then the attackers in total can get about 80% of all the slots in the cell. I mentioned that we used we used a formula to estimate the maximum ratio among all the other cell phones. How good is our prediction? Well, so this graph shows you how good our prediction is. So the y-axis shows our prediction accuracy, which means that among all the predicted values, which of them are the correct values. So we show that it doesn't matter how many attackers there are in the cell, our prediction accuracy consistently remains above 90%. You have to look at the effect of the impact of the attack in terms of how many scheduling slots that the attackers can get. But how does that translate to something that ordinary people can understand? In other words, how does that affect real applications? Well, so first we looked at the throughput. Before the attack, every cell phone in the cell gets about between 40 to 50 kilobit per second throughput. Okay, assuming that every cell phone has similar channel condition. However, after the attack, if there's only one attacker in a cell of 50 users, then that one attacker can get 1.5 megabit per second throughput, whereas all the other victim users get about 10 to 15 kilobit per second throughput each. So that's about 3 times the drop. Yes.
Do you get more bandwidth as there's more people, or is it less for you to steer?
There's a fixed amount of total bandwidth. Okay. So each cell has a fixed total amount of bandwidth determined by what frequency they're using.
But I mean, like, the more users you have on the network, does that mean like the more you can, like, it's harder to steal all the? Do the percentages go down as you increase the users?
Percentage of what?
Of the bandwidth
Stolen by.
that you can steal. Does it go down as you have more users added to the network?
I see. So are you saying that if I have 100 users in the network, will it be harder for the attacker to get
1.5 megabits?
Yes, that's true. That's definitely true. However, on the other side, the more users there are in a cell, the less bandwidth that the user gets to start with. So once the attack happens, each victim user will get even less bandwidth. Right. So if your application depends on the availability of bandwidth and the amount of delay, then this attack would affect the victim users even more. It depends on the goal of the attacker. If the goal of the attacker is just being selfish, then of course the attacker wants to get as much bandwidth as possible. So in this case, you wish that there are fewer users in the cell. Right? So the fewer users there are in the cell, the more bandwidth the attacker can get. However, if the goal of the attacker is to wreak havoc in the network, then you wish that there are as many users in the cell as possible, because that way you can adversely impact the victim users even more. Okay, so we have looked at the impact of the attack on the bandwidth, but certain applications are delay sensitive. Okay, so what's the impact of the delay of the attack? So before the attack, again assuming similar channel conditions of all mobile users, before the attack, there are about 10 millisecond average delay between 2 consecutive transmissions, okay, on every user. After the attack, where there's one attacker in a cell of 50 users, after the attack in a cell of 50 users, one attacker can cause about 0.8 seconds of delay, whereas 5 attackers can cause about 1.8 second delay. So how does this translate to the impact on applications? Well, a typical delay-sensitive application is voice over IP. Voice over IP is very delay-sensitive. Ideally, you want the delay to be less than 100 milliseconds. If the delay is between 100 milliseconds and 400 milliseconds, it's tolerable. But your voice quality will degrade. However, if the delay is more than 400 milliseconds, people believe that the voice over IP application becomes useless. Okay. Well, now you can see that if there's only one attacker in a cell of 50 users, the average delay is about 800 milliseconds. That's way over the tolerable delay in voice over IP applications. In the fourth generation cellular networks, voice will be carried over data. Okay. So, well, fortunately, currently the 4G fourth generation cellular networks, they demand that the voice data have a higher priority than other regular data. Okay. But if they had not designed that in such a way, then you can see what would happen. Because in that case, only one attacker in a cell of 50 users can disrupt all the VoIP applications. Okay, so now we understand the impact of the attack. What can we do about it? We can try anomaly detection. We can monitor the average throughput of every cellular user. Okay, based on the assumption that no user should have super good channel quality that it grabs more than, say, 50% of all the slots. Okay, but what if there's a cell with only 2 users and one user has a better channel quality than another user? Well, you have to modify your anomaly detection algorithm to say that, okay, if there are fewer than 5 users, then that's okay. But if there are more than 5 users, then no user can grab more than this number of slots. Yeah, no matter what you do, you can always find some corner cases where you have to modify your rule again. Okay, so this is it might help, but it's not an ideal solution. You can also try to do anomaly detection based on the number of handoffs. Remember that the persistent attack based on frequent handoff among different cells. Typically, this should not happen, right? Because you hand off only if typically we hand off when you drive, when you move. So you move from one cell to another. So you can say that, well, a cell phone can't have more than one handoff per 10 seconds. But then what if a cell phone happened to sit on in the overlapping area of 2 cells? And due to some random interference, suddenly one cell becomes better than the other. So this cell phone just hands off very frequently, but not for a malicious reason. So you might have some false positive thinking that this cell phone is attacking your network, but whereas it really isn't. So once you start to do anomaly detection, you get all into this very hairy area of how do you have a good rule that don't cause a lot of false positives. So we try to devise an approach that does not have these problems, that solves the root of the problem. And even better, we wish to prevent this problem from happening in the first place. But remember, there are 2 vulnerabilities that are roots of the problem. The first is that the base station does not verify the channel condition report by the cell phone. Well, we are not aware of anything that the base station can do to verify that, right? Because you have to measure this channel condition at the location of the cell phone. Since the base station is not at the location of the cell phone, so there's not much that the base station can do to verify the report. However, the second root cause is that the proportional fair algorithm does not guarantee fairness across all cells. It guarantees fairness only within a single cell. So therefore, if we can extend the proportional fair algorithm to guarantee fairness across all the cells, then we could have prevented this problem from happening in the first place. So the approach is very intuitive. once a cell phone moves from one cell to another, its average throughput should move with it. Okay. And this is not too difficult to implement, because once a cell phone moves from one cell to another, some other information has to move with the cell phone as well, such as how many minutes it has used from the previous cell. So we just want to add this additional information to move with the cell phone. You might think that this is so trivial, but it's not as trivial as I just described, because you can't just copy the average throughput over, because different cells may have different users. Intuitively, in a cell with fewer users, each user will have a higher throughput, average throughput, than another cell with more number of users. All right. So when you move this average throughput over, you have to scale the average throughput by the number of users in the cell. Moreover, average throughput is also affected by the average channel condition in that cell. Because once channel condition gets better, throughput increases. So you also have to take into consideration the average throughput of a cell. So we used this formula as an estimation of an average throughput in a cell. So this is the first term is the estimation of the instantaneous channel quality. This term is the gain of that cell. Typically, people use a log n as a rough estimation of the gain. And here n is the number of users in the cell. So this is the formula that we used to calculate the average throughput of a cell phone between two cells. Okay. So you plug in the formula from before, and remember that when a cell phone moves from one cell to the other, it's at the border of both cells. Right? So its channel quality its instantaneous channel quality should be similar in both cells. So therefore, these two terms cancel out, and here's what you get. And we know the number of users in each cell, and the gain is approximated by log n. So we know how to calculate this value. And once we know if the user moves from cell A to cell B, since we know it's the user's average throughput in cell A, then using this formula, we can calculate its average throughput in cell B. Okay, so our related work. There have been some work on looking at attacks on scheduling in cellular data networks. So this is one particular work from Sprint Labs. Instead of attacking the scheduler by reporting false channel quality information, they do not modify the cell phone at all, but rather they try to attack scheduling indirectly by using bursty traffic from the application level. So what they do is that they have two laptops connected to a test cellular network inside the Spring Labs. And one laptop is a victim user, the other laptop is an attacker. So the attacker will remain silent for a while, which meaning that it does not send any traffic. And suddenly, this attack laptop sends very bursty HTTP traffic. So this would cause the scheduler to give this attack laptop a lot of scheduling slots. Okay. So this would result in the starvation of the victim laptop. However, since they don't hand over, their attack is not that effective. Remember, I said before that the fewer number of users in a cell, the less scheduling slots that the attacker can get. Okay. So they only have two laptops in a cell. So that's the best situation. Okay. So remember, I said before that the fewer number of users in the fewer number of users in a cell, the less penalty that the users will get, because the users will get more bandwidth to start with. Right? So in this case, they have only 2 users in a cell. One of them is an attacker. So in this way, and also because they're attacking the HTTP. They're using HTTP to attack the TCP flow control. So once they send the burst traffic, they can show that this would cause the TCP to time out. Okay. Since they're not directly modifying the reported channel quality, their attack would not be as effective as our attack. And also, since they don't do the handover, so their attack cannot perpetuate. There are some other attacks on cellular data networks, cellular networks. So there are attacks on the SMS. So this attack shows that you can use SMS to overwhelm the paging channels. So paging channel is a channel by which when you turn on your cell phone, so when you call a cell phone, if the cell phone is not active, then your cellular network will use the paging channel to find the cell phone. So they discovered that you can send SMS messages to overwhelm the paging channel. And there are also attacks on connection establishments, and also includes our previous work on attacking the battery power of cell phones using the internet. Okay, so in conclusion, we think that a fundamental flaw in the design of the cellular networks is that they grant unwarranted trust to mobile devices. And we discovered 2 particular vulnerabilities in the proportional fair scheduler. One is that malicious cell phones can report fake channel quality information. The other is that malicious cell phones can request handover, and when they do handover, their average throughput is not carried over with them. And we demonstrated that the attack can severely reduce the bandwidth and increase delay of all the victim users, and they can essentially make the voice over IP application useless. And we proposed an approach to enforce global fairness to prevent the attack from happening in the first place. I will be happy to take questions.
I have a question. So I didn't get the justification why it is not a good solution to let the base station kind of limit the rate, like the time slots received by each cell phone at any time. So I think that's kind of like a good kind of policing kind of policy. My second question is, does this apply to both uplink and downlink?
Good question. Let me answer the second question first. That's easier. So the question is that does this attack apply to both uplink and downlink? No, this only applies to the downlink, because only the downlink uses a proportional fair scheduling. Okay.
But what do they use for the uplink? I'm just curious.
They use for the let's see. What do they use for uplink? I think they don't. Let's see. So for downlink, once the base station gets some data, outstanding data, the base station will decide which cell phone to send to. For uplink, I believe that. Okay, I shouldn't give you wrong information. Okay, I can tell you offline, but I don't want to give you false information. The first question is that why can't the base station have a limit on the bandwidth of each cellular users? The base station could do that, but once you do that, you begin to interfere with the scheduling algorithm. So essentially, you're putting additional constraints on the scheduling algorithm. Now, once you begin to do that, you could violate certain properties that have been proved for this scheduling algorithm. Okay, so when people design a scheduling algorithm, they have certain objectives, and they prove that this algorithm satisfies those properties. But once you add additional constraints to that, then maybe those properties cannot hold anymore. Okay, so this is one problem. Another problem is that it's hard to come up with a reasonable limit. It depends on how many users there are in the system, and also what are other, say, quality of service constraints. It's hard to get a number that's good in different scenarios.
And sometimes slots may be just wasted in doing that, I guess.
Yeah. So, other questions? Yes.
So I wonder how sensitive the attack is to the correctness of the estimation of this CQI, and also whether the correctness depends on simulation parameters. So if maybe in real network, maybe the other cell phone will have different situation at the simulation, then would the correctness drop significantly?
Yes, those are both excellent questions. So the first question is that does the effectiveness of the attack depend on the quality of the estimation of the CQI? Yes, definitely it does. It does. Think about it. The estimation tells the attacker what channel quality indicator to report. If the report is too low, then the attacker's ratio is not the highest, so the attacker won't get the next slot. If the estimation is too high, that doesn't really hurt, because then the attacker can get, so that could hurt, because then the attacker will get the next slot, but it can't utilize the high bandwidth, right? It's wasting its average throughput, because its throughput will be increased more than it needs to. So yes, so the first question is definitely yes. So that's why we measure the accuracy of our estimation. The second question is that does the quality of the estimation depend on our simulation parameters? Absolutely, it does. However, in our simulation, we simulated the channel quality of the victim users using a standard Rayleigh distribution, which, as far as I know, is a typical model when you try to analyze the channel quality of different mobile users. Okay. Yes, if if this model deviates from your actual situation, then yes, the quality of your estimation will change.
Any other questions? If not, let's thank the speaker one more time.